Well, hello and welcome. You're watching India Fights, back with me, Rajat Kain. In this episode, we'll discuss about how to balance the opening up after lockdown and taking precautions so that infection remains contained. Well, we have seen in past few days, numbers have started to rise again. It's marginal, sometimes it's a seesaw. Numbers come down by a few thousand and next day it goes up by another few thousand. In amid all this, there happens to be worry in few states, especially where the R value or R naught happens to be above 1. Let me explain you what's R value or R naught. That means it's a percentile of infection that has been spread per person. If R value is 1, that means if 100 people are infected, they are possibly passing on infection to 100 people, another 100 people. If it is below 1, that means it's a sigh of relief. At least in a next cumulative assessment, the number of infected patients could be lesser. Well, in few states, the R number happens to be above 1, whereas at the national level, we have been able to contain or control R value to 0.95. Now, how important, therefore, it is to basically stress on COVID appropriate behavior and what we need to do in terms of opening up, which is also essential so as to take into consideration the parameters of economy. To discuss further on this issue, we're joined with Mr. N.K. Ganguly. He's former Director General, ICMR. Many thanks, Dr. Ganguly, for joining us. And Dr. Anil Gurtoo, he is Director Professor, Department of Medicine, Lady Hardinge Medical College, Delhi. Many thanks, Dr. Gurtoo, to be part of the show. Let me start with you, Dr. Gurtoo. I mean, let's look at a micro picture. Like as we have seen in Delhi, a lot of things have opened up. I mean, public transport, cinema, malls, multiplexes. What I know, there are reasons and there is a defense for opening up because it's a question of economy and people's livelihood. At the same time, are we seeing numbers also rising in Delhi and what we need to do? I know, albeit very slowly though.
The numbers in Delhi, if you look at the numbers per se, it might not be very alarming at the moment.
Right.
However, the sky might appear very clear and blue right now when we look overhead. But where we have to focus is on the horizon. How clean is the horizon? And the best way to focus our gaze on the horizon is to keep our gaze centered on that value you just referred to, the reproduction number or the R naught,
right,
or the effective R naught. Because by the time the test positivity rate, which is well controlled in Delhi, apparently, rises and leads to the resultant rise in the caseloads, which then inundates and overflows the hospitals, as the last experience showed, it would be too late.
Right.
So the figure to keep our eye on is not the sky overhead, which is still clear and blue and safe. It is on the horizon where the dark clouds are beginning to form and the R naught is slowly, though, rising, even in Delhi, from 0.65 to 0.75 to 0.85. And now I think it's closer to 0.95. And 0.95, even that smallest decimal rise represents a significant and exponential rise in the risk of an outbreak becoming an epidemic. So R naught over Delhi is rising and it's inching its way up slowly, decimal by decimal, over the last 1 month. 0.95 is too close to 1 to say that we are safe under the clear skies. So a graded action plan is what the government has come up with, and if implemented along with the backup of vaccination drives and enforcement, and we need to go in for more enforcement right now because it's an emergency happening, about to come, of the COVID appropriate behavior. So, and the graded opening and closing plan in a dynamic way. That's the right way, I think, to go.
Right. Many thanks, Dr. Gurtoo, for your opening remarks. Stay on, sir. Mr. Ganguly, many thanks to be part of the show. Many thanks for waiting, sir. Let me ask you the overall broader picture of the country. In last 3 weeks, if I'm right, the numbers which we have today is on the higher side, and we are seeing, upward trend. How worrying the situation. I'll come to a state-specific question, but overall, what do you assess of say, across the country situation?
Overall, it's very, very worrying if you really look at.
Mm-hmm.
We should take Kerala as an example, although you have not asked for state.
I will.
It
That's
is
what
a
I said.
state.
I'll come to states. Right, right.
It,
Please carry on,
yeah,
sir.
it is, for me to explain, it is very important to explain Kerala.
Absolutely,
Kerala
absolutely.
has had always been very high viral load.
Mm-hmm.
About 18 years or 20 years back, I was called in the Kerala Assembly to do something for Kerala to take care of the viral load. So they had three institutes, RGCB,
Mm-hmm.
the Advanced Center of Biology in Kerala, and LFP Center of ICMR.
Okay.
And they have a strong public health institutes over there and very strong public health system over there. So they have been actually testing much better, and public health responses were much better over there. Even then they have shown rise there.
Mm-hmm.
And this rise is not explained by testing.
Mm-hmm.
This is hospital admissions and deaths also. They are the indicator that really the cases have risen there, apart from the R factor, which Dr. Gurtoo explained. And if you see all the neighboring states,
Mm-hmm.
all of them are rising.
Right.
And hospitalization and deaths are also increasing in all those neighboring states. So in Delhi, also it is rising. I totally agree with Dr. Gurtoo that it has been rising. If you really study what has happened in United States, what is happening in UK and some of the European countries and Russia, they had touched much lesser rock bottom. And because they removed the mask mandate and the vaccination hesitancy was very high in US and some of the European countries, you saw now it is horrendous. It is exponentially rising. And the same thing is going to happen over here if we are not careful. So what I will, because the vaccination will take 4 months minimum, there is still vaccine shortage and there are distribution and equity problems, which we will have to solve. So all of this, if we really consider, and the mathematical model says that we will have the third wave around November. And they have taken about 15, 16 factors to analyze the whole of the system. And one Bakarid in Kerala, you saw it actually gave it a push. So here, what I will say that we need to really observe for next 3-4 months. We need to accelerate vaccines. We need to go to children and others for which we have now a vaccine, and pregnant women, and try to cover as much of a population when we are opening up schools, etc. And we also need to really open up slowly. Just 3 months patience will actually do the trick. We should not be suddenly opening up everything. Now the cinemas are open. Some of the buses will have 100% carrying capacity.
Even metros.
We should be very cautious in this. And wherever you can work from home, people should work from home. And they should be paid for that. So all of this, if we take, we perhaps will avoid having a disaster. But we are staring at a very disastrous situation. And Kerala guys, they go all over the world. And they go all over India also. Most nurses, and there are certain special type of jobs which they do. And they will be moving all around India. And within India, except Uttarakhand and others, there are no RT-PCR or other testing mechanisms which are in place. So the spread will happen when it is happening at one place. If it is happening anywhere in the world, it happens in other parts of the world. So we should be very serious. And I am very happy that you have analyzed this very well in your analysis. And this analysis should be actually useful to the people who are making decisions.
Right. Many thanks, sir. Pleasure having you. Just stay on, Mr. Ganguly. We will definitely discuss more about the vaccination. That's important aspect to contain the spread. Dr. Gurtoo, as Mr. Ganguly just explained about, say, a case study of one state, Kerala in particular, and of course we saw that how some social events actually pushed the numbers. Besides that, I mean, what perhaps can be the reason of spike in numbers? We're seeing numbers rising in Kerala. We're seeing numbers rising in Tamil Nadu. We're seeing numbers rising in some of the northeastern states as well, or at least they're continuing to rise in northeastern states. What are the reasons for that? Is just the mobility or density of population or beyond that?
The reasons for upsurge, whatever upsurge, the quantum wise, magnitude wise is happening anywhere, the reasons are the same. And they basically lead, these upsurges are created, are born through an interaction of only two factors, regardless of everything else. One factor is what percentage of the population in that state or the district is still susceptible. By susceptible, I mean that they still have not gained immunity by way of either natural infection or by way of vaccination. Now, this mass percentage of the total population, which is still susceptible to the virus, forms the first base or the variable. This, however, by and of itself is not enough. You might have a huge susceptible population. However, the other thing that must happen in order to explode into an upsurge is that this susceptible population must come into contact with infected population of people.
Okay.
When these two things co-occur, happen together interactively, and in their interaction from that interactive zone between the susceptible and the infected and infectious people coming together, explodes the upsurge or the epidemic or the infection. There can be no third reason for this anywhere, whatever, wherever. So whatever is sero-prevalence and all shows, first of all, even though 2/3 as an aggregate average are sero-positive and therefore protected against severe critical infection, yes, but that is not a homogeneous single sort of a brush that paints the entire country. There are zones, even in Kerala, I believe it's only 44% sero-prevalence, which means a huge chunk is still susceptible. Even if you assume that overall aggregate of 2/3 being immune by the sero-prevalence studies holds, even then 1/3 is still susceptible.
Absolutely.
And 1/3 of 1.3 billion people amounts to almost how much? 400 million people.
Yeah.
That's a huge number waiting to explode anytime, any day, any moment. We let off the gaze from the gaze that are not, which is where we should stay focused on. And if that is inching and stays high, closer to 1 before it even touches 1, because once it touches 1, it explodes. We have to get active. And there, the action has to be dynamic, sometimes widening, sometimes narrowing, sometimes more, sometimes less. It has to change, be an adaptive response. In addition to structured enforcement of COVID-appropriate behaviors and structured equitous approaches towards mass vaccination, what Dr. Ganguly just mentioned, there's no other third alternative, I think.
Dr. Gurtoo, just a small query, as we saw, a catastrophic second wave in the months of April and May, it was devastating. A lot of people lost their lives and family members and near and dear ones. There was massive shortage of oxygen. What was our value in those days? Because that, of course, that's really important for our viewers to understand that.
So that had gone up way above 1. Because R naught means that as one infected person, how many other infections does that one person generate during the period he's infectious before recovery. After recovery, he's safe. He is not generating new infections. It's only during that period of being infected and infectious, both.
Right.
It
Right.
depends on how many people I come into contact with. So 1 and above triggers an explosion, an epidemic.
Right. Right. So
Below
one.
1.
Yeah. Yeah.
1 is the line, and by the time we arrive at 1, it's already too late. So that's what I think, that instead of focusing right now on test positivity rates or caseloads on a weekly averages, those are latecomers. By then, it's already too late and we've lost the situation. So are not hovering close to 1, staying there for continuously on a plateau, that would be the alarm, where we should begin to get more tighter on more stringent on our approaches to public health.
Absolutely. Dr. Gurtoo, just stay on. Mr. Ganguly, as there is no doubt that, as if we touch 1 in terms of R naught, once again we'll be having a tough time in terms of caseload, in terms of numbers, and of course, the viral load and infection. So you talked about the vaccination pace. I know the current vaccination pace seems to be more wanting, but at the same time, there is, I have more of a academic query here. The gap between 2 doses, is there a reason to revise it now at least? Or I mean, you're satisfied of a gap of 12 to 14 weeks?
Actually, you could say 8 to 14 weeks up to in 2 vaccines which we are using, at least in 1. 8 weeks also gives a good response. Even in Pfizer's vaccine, they have found out that if you give a little more gap, you get a better immune response. So, but more than 12 weeks will be little dicey, and we have to give the 2 doses. If we don't give 2 doses, then it really doesn't work. At the moment in United States, if we see, that is a very good example. There is the pandemic of unvaccinated. In India, they have 1/3, and some states 50% unvaccinated. Wherever it is 50% unvaccinated, that it is disaster. And wherever there are vaccinated, but there are other people who are not having appropriate behavior, it is rising. So at this given moment in India, it is very appropriate that pandemic is by the unvaccinated to vaccinated. And the behavior, when we ask that people should observe good behavioral stances, the poor, the homeless, those laborers and others, service workers who have to go and work, it is very difficult for them to really observe all those masking and all those behavior and non-crowding and others. So we need, the vaccination is one of the very major thing with the COVID appropriate behavior. And there we need to introduce 2 things. One is the social and behavioral and communication scientists. They are mostly NGOs. They should spread out and spread these messages, and also economically do things which will ultimately make people who are deprived to observe COVID behaviors. And some cases it's very difficult. Like in Kerala, there is no rural area. Rural, peri-urban, urban have all merged. And that with the density of population, you find that very difficult there. So there the vaccination rates have to be enhanced exponentially. Secondly, sometimes our antibody things that which predict that whether we have herd immunity is not is a faulty thing. That several methods of looking at antibodies, and the protective antibodies are not normally measured in the serosurveillance thing. The T cell immunity is not measured. Kerala had severe lockdown, very severe lockdown. So maybe their population was not exposed. And suddenly when the freedom came and the numbers dropped, everyone actually jumped up. But if you look at Tamil Nadu, Telangana and other places, the cases were dropping there. It was not like Kerala, which was rising, but now they have started rising. So, so the vaccination also, we need to be intelligent and rush vaccine in areas where we need to really go through a sledgehammer technique of vaccination. Vaccinate as many people there as possibly and put up as much economic stimulus as well COVID appropriate behavior, and also set up testing. If they move to one place to other, they need to be tested because the testing is one of the things. If we are not taking behavior seriously, then testing remains one of the things in which you could again limit the transmission. So, so transmission dynamics will be very, very important. And in our country, in many countries now, like weather, they can predict. The University of Pittsburgh, the Matrix University in Washington, and others are world-class mathematical modelers. They can predict very accurately what will happen and when it will happen. So we should look at those predictions. They give predictions, global predictions also. And we should then take those predictions seriously. And taking those predictions, we should put up our matrices over there. So there is no one solution for the entire India. It is a very diverse country, distant population, disadvantaged population, many other factors which actually affect. So we need to migrant population. So we need to really have very strong public health and other measures along with what we are doing. So just vaccination is one of the things, but other public health measures, strengthening them and putting that workforce along the areas where we have actually countrywide will make those changes, bring those changes.
Right. Mr. Ganguly, just stay on, sir. Dr. Gurtoo, continuing on the vaccination, and of course, like your take first on duration or to say period between the two vaccine doses. And secondly, we have seen of late studies on the breakthrough infection. Now, since that's also, connected with the vaccination, is it worrying? I know the numbers are very, very small, very tiny in terms of the breakthrough infection, but looking at the broader picture, is it a worrisome trend or is it a usual thing to have breakthrough infection cases?
Breakthrough infections in terms of a clinical viewpoint is not that alarming as of now, because breakthrough infections are happening, yes. They are at a very lower percentage in terms of magnitude of their happening. And most importantly, anyone who's been vaccinated and then gets a breakthrough infection is by and large protected against getting a severe or a critically life-threatening infection. So they are happening, yes. And even in older people, when they are fully vaccinated and they get it, it's nothing more than 2 days of cough, sneeze, bad throat, or some fever. Practically, we are not seeing those who are fully vaccinated and later on happen to get a breakthrough infection. We are not seeing them get critically ill or down with severe hospitalization requiring illness. So from a clinical standpoint, breakthrough infections are not of concern. They may be of concern from the point of view of spread of infection to others.
Right.
Highlighting the fact that even after the 2 vaccinations, while I am protected, you are protected against a severe disease and death, you have to protect the others. So COVID appropriate behavior should be followed. So that is the implication. Dosing and all, yes, I agree with Dr. Ganguly, what he said, that up to 12 weeks, gives you a booster response, a higher response in immune this thing. So to save and to economize on the number of vaccine first dosing to those areas where the R0 is beginning to rise, rush all of them to those areas and focus on them, at least one dose to a larger population, waiting the second dose 8 to 12 weeks later would give you a better mass immediate result
Okay.
than a
That-
fewer
that's-
people with 2 doses. Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah.
Many thanks. Right. Dr. Gurtoo, I'm really sorry I have to stop you here. Time is short, but really enlightening to have both of you here. And absolutely, it's essential that all our viewers who are watching the show, that they should listen to the experts. Do not listen to hearsay. We had these two experts here, Dr. Anil Gurtoo, Director Professor from LHMC, and Mr. N.K. Ganguly, former Director, ICMR. Clearly, they analyzed, situation in terms of R number, rising number of cases, vaccination, the speed, and of course, breakthrough infection. So whatever we are doing at this stage, we should be extremely careful. We have done some good work in terms of containing. At the same time, lot needs to be done. That's the gist of this discussion. Well, many thanks for watching this edition of IFB. Many thanks to both our experts. Gentlemen, many thanks for joining us. Thank you. Goodbye.